Sodom was a lively, crowded city, pulsing with the thrill of trade, music, and endless noise. Its people, restless and hungry for more, filled the streets with eager eyes and hearts untouched by fear. Wealth was everywhere, pleasures that passed quickly, shady deals, loud laughter, and celebrations that never seemed to stop. To any outsider, it looked like the very peak of success. But beneath that glittering surface, something dark was spreading quietly. Though the streets were full, the people were blind to the truth. Their altars stood empty, stirring no faith. Their open windows looked out to skies that no longer answered. Pride filled their hearts. God? What God? They said. Even he would not dare stop us. Far away, under the blazing desert sun, a man of faith named Abraham welcomed 3 mysterious visitors. They weren't ordinary travelers, but heavenly messengers on a divine mission. 2 were angels, and the third was the Lord himself, appearing in human form. They came to bring judgment, and Sodom's name was among the first to face it. Abraham, deeply aware of the spiritual weight of this revelation, sensed what was coming. Destruction was near, and Sodom would not see another sunrise. In compassion and faith, he pleaded for mercy. Yet the divine decision had already been made. Meanwhile, in Sodom, life went on as usual. The people laughed, danced, and sinned without restraint. No one stopped to think. No one realized that the ground they stood on was about to crumble, that the heavens they ignored were now preparing to strike. Judgment was already moving forward, unstoppable. When the fire began to fall, there would be no escape. Homes, temples, palaces, children, and animals, all would burn. For when God closes the heavens, it is to open the earth, and this time it would not be a warning, but the end of an age. Abraham, the faithful patriarch, lived far from such corruption. He wandered among his tents and altars with loyal servants, rich flocks, and unshaken promises. Though old, his eyes still looked toward heaven, listening for the voice that had called him out of Ur of the Chaldeans. The blessing he carried wasn't for him alone. It extended to his nephew Lot, who also prospered with great herds, servants, and riches. As their possessions grew, the land could no longer sustain them both. Soon their shepherds began to quarrel over pastures and water. Tension threatened to divide uncle and nephew. With humility and wisdom, Abraham proposed peace. He said to Lot, "Let there be no conflict between us or our shepherds, for we are family. Look, this whole land is before you. If you choose the left, I will go right. If you choose the right, I will go left." Lot looked around and was instantly drawn to the lush valley of the Jordan, green, fertile, and full of promise. In the center of that paradise shone Sodom, glittering like the heart of prosperity. Without praying, without seeking God's will, without considering the cost, Lot chose by sight, alone. He journeyed east, set up camp near Sodom, and eventually moved into the city. Soon he sat among its judges, living as one of them, shaped by its ways and customs. Abraham, however, stayed true to his calling. He did not follow appearances or chase what looked easy. He continued his journey through the wilderness, keeping his altar burning and his faith alive. One scorching, still afternoon, 3 men appeared before him. They came without rank or soldiers, yet their presence carried divine power that made everything pause. Abraham ran to greet them, bowed low to the ground, and begged them to rest. He offered bread, meat, and shade, showing the humble hospitality that reflected his faithful heart. Abraham didn't fully understand what was happening, but deep in his spirit, he sensed that heaven was at work, and that these men had not come by chance. They shared a meal with him, accepted his hospitality, and when they stood to leave, their eyes turned toward the plain below, toward Sodom. 2 of them continued on their way to the city, but the third stayed behind. Abraham remained before him, and it was then that God spoke, not in thunder or lightning, but in a quiet, powerful voice that pierced the soul. "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do?" he said. "He will become a great nation, and through him all the nations of the earth will be blessed." The Lord reaffirmed his covenant, and then revealed his coming judgment. "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very severe. I will go down and see if what I have heard is true, and if not, I will know." This was not uncertainty on God's part. It was a demonstration of his perfect justice. Abraham listened, and his heart grew heavy. He knew that the time of divine mercy was almost gone, that wickedness had reached its limit, and that judgment from heaven was near. But Sodom's destruction did not happen overnight. Its fall was slow, steady, and certain, like a body bending down, not in worship to God, but in surrender to its own corruption. What began as small compromises and hidden sins grew into public celebrations of evil. In the public squares, grotesque idols of false gods replaced the symbols of faith and righteousness. Men dressed as pagan deities and took part in dark rituals, while women offered their bodies in fertility ceremonies where children were not cherished but sacrificed. The smoke from these cruel offerings darkened the skies, blending with the stench of wine and blood. Shouts of victory echoed through the streets. "This is our time to rule." The city, drunk with pride, glorified itself, dancing and celebrating its own reflection. Justice had been completely corrupted. Verdicts were bought with gold and flesh. Judges gathered at night in lavish feasts where sentences were decided by bribes and pleasure. The poor who cried out for fairness were beaten into silence. Widows were thrown from their homes so nobles could take them for their own desires. Hungry orphans were sold for a coin. In the dark alleys, the starving whispered, "If we cannot eat, we are already dead." No one heard them, or if they did, they mocked them. In one shadowed corner, a young boy hid his face as he watched two men drag a woman behind a temple to her doom. No one stopped them. It was accepted. It was called freedom, tradition, the way of the city. High in their palaces, the rulers raised silver cups engraved with pagan symbols, toasting in open defiance of God. Their advisers boasted, "If Abraham's God exists, let him speak. Let him. Until then we are gods." Their words rose like spears toward heaven, but heaven stayed silent for the moment. Amid all the corruption that poisoned Sodom, one sin stood out above the rest, an act that defied the very order of creation. The men of Sodom burned with lust for one another, not in secret, but proudly in the open streets. They forced themselves on others and mocked those who resisted. They called indulgence a virtue and surrendering to desire a mark of honor. Homes became places of unholy acts under the false claim that love knows no law. But what they practiced was not love. It was domination, lust, and mockery of the Creator. Boys were taken as offerings, and young men were treated as trophies. The elders of Sodom taught the young to corrupt themselves, as though it were a rite of passage into the city's sinful way of life. The women, treated as objects and stripped of dignity, followed the same path, selling their bodies in open rebellion against heaven. It was as if the entire city cried out together, "We will do whatever we please with our bodies, and anyone who stands against us will be forgotten." Sodom's pride was not only in lust, but in the hardness of its heart, carved from arrogance and cruelty. Its joy came from domination, humiliation, and power over others. Strangers who entered the city were welcomed at first, then tempted, tested, and finally either corrupted or destroyed. Those who refused to conform simply disappeared. Behind the polished walls and elegant homes were secret pacts with death. The wide streets, where glittering chariots passed by, hid beneath them the corpses of those crushed by injustice and inequality. Yet among the cracked roofs and shadowed alleys, a faint sound remained, a whisper, a forgotten prayer, a memory of the God of righteousness. Only a few still prayed in secret, but their voices were too weak to rise above the noise of feasting, laughter, and sin. Then, on a dark night without a moon, a single star streaked across the sky, small and faint, but carrying a warning of what was to come. In the silent heavens, an angel stirred. The night descended slowly over the plain, heavy and unnatural, as though time itself held its breath before a great event. Sodom, unaware of its destiny, continued in its usual rhythm, noisy, careless, filled with smoke from its feasts, laughter without shame, and music without holiness. But that night, two mysterious travelers entered through the city gates. There was no light around them, no announcement of who they were, but they carried a presence that the sinful eyes of men could not perceive. They were the angels of Jehovah, sent by the God of Abraham. No one in Sodom recognized their holiness or offered them honor, no one except one man, Lot. He was sitting at the city gate among the judges, as he did every day, caught up in the routine of that place. When Lot saw the two strangers, something within him, something uncorrupted by the years he had spent among Sodom's wickedness, recognized holiness. He still knew what was sacred, and his heart remembered the ancient law of hospitality. He rose quickly, bowed low with his face to the ground, and spoke urgently, almost pleading, "My lords, please come to your servant's house. Spend the night here, wash your feet, and in the morning you may go on your way." But the men, fully aware of what lurked in the streets, replied, "No, we will stay in the square tonight." Lot insisted earnestly, his voice trembling with urgency. He knew what prowled through the city after dark, what horrors hid behind laughter and music. At his persistence, the strangers agreed and followed him home. Inside, Lot prepared food swiftly, unleavened bread, a place to rest, asking no questions, exchanging no names. But Sodom was not a city that slept. Word spread quickly. 2 strangers had entered Lot's house. Curiosity and desire rippled through the streets like fire through dry grass. Soon men from every corner of the city, young and old alike, gathered outside his door. They pounded on it furiously, shouting, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them." Their words were blunt and vile, driven by lust and cruelty. They didn't simply want to see the strangers. They wanted to humiliate them, to make a spectacle of their corruption. Lot rushed outside and shut the door behind him. Desperately, he tried to reason with the mob. "I beg you, my brothers, do not do this wicked thing," he said. "I have 2 daughters who have never known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they are under the protection of my roof." The words revealed the terrible effect Sodom had on him. Even as he tried to do right, his thinking had been twisted by the city's darkness. He was willing to sacrifice his own daughters to protect strangers, an act that showed how deeply the line between right and wrong had been broken. But the mob was beyond reason. They roared back at him, caring nothing for his plea or his offer. They only wanted what their desires demanded. They pressed forward violently, threatening Lot and beating against the door, ready to tear it down. Then the angels revealed who they truly were. With sudden power, they reached out, pulled Lot back inside and shut the door firmly. In an instant, they struck the men outside with blindness, from the youngest to the oldest, until they groped helplessly in the dark, still clawing for the doorway they could no longer find. Their physical blindness was only a reflection of their deeper spiritual blindness, the darkness that had already consumed Sodom's soul. Then the angels spoke to Lot with a grave and final tone. "Gather your family, your wife, your daughters, your sons-in-law, anyone who belongs to you in this city. Take them and leave, for we are about to destroy this place. The outcry against it has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to bring judgment." Their words were not a warning. They were a final decree. The measure of sin was full, the last chance had passed, and heaven itself was ready to descend in fire. The first light of dawn had barely touched the horizon when the angels urged Lot to move. Yet he stood frozen, uncertain, unable to fully comprehend the weight of what he had just heard. The judgment was set. The city's end was no longer a warning, it was a decree. Still, Lot lingered. His eyes drifted from one thing to another, as if searching for something worth saving. His possessions, his memories, perhaps one last comfort from the life he was leaving behind. The angels did not wait for his faith to rise. They acted out of God's mercy. They seized his hand, the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, leading them quickly beyond the city walls. Scripture says it clearly, the Lord was merciful to him. Once outside, the angels gave their final urgent command. "Run for your lives, don't stop anywhere in the plain, don't look back." But even then, Lot hesitated. The mountains looked far, the desert seemed harsh, and fear clouded his mind. "Please," he pleaded, "let me flee to that small town over there. It's close enough to reach, and I can survive there. It's only a little one. Let us take refuge there." The angel answered, "Very well. I will spare that town for your sake. But hurry, go quickly, I can do nothing until you arrive there." So Lot ran, leading his family toward the small town called Zoar. Behind them, the sky began to darken. The winds stilled. The air grew heavy with an unnatural silence, the stillness before divine judgment. And at the very moment Lot crossed into Zoar, judgment fell. Fire rained from the heavens, not ordinary fire, but a torrent of burning sulfur sent directly from the Lord. The ground quaked, hills split open, houses crumbled in an instant. Screams rose and disappeared in the roar of destruction. The beauty of the lush valley was consumed in a sea of flames. What had once promised life now became a graveyard of ashes. In the midst of their escape, while running for her life, Lot's wife looked back. Though she had been warned, her heart turned before her head did. Her longing for what she left behind, the comfort, the memories, the world she had built, overpowered her obedience. Perhaps she wanted to see if it was real. Perhaps she mourned her home. Perhaps she doubted it would truly end, but heaven allowed no second glance. In that instant, she became a pillar of salt. Frozen in time, her body hardened into a monument of disobedience. She stood as a silent warning for all generations that looking back to a doomed world is the same as turning away from salvation. Lot continued onward, but now without his wife, without his past, without a home. He reached Zoar, but found no peace there. Behind him the judgment still thundered. The heavens stayed closed, and smoke rose like a never-ending column from the plain. He was saved, but not whole. Delivered, yet deeply scarred. Grace had pulled him from the fire, but his heart still trembled with grief for what he had lost and guilt for what he had allowed. But even then the story was not over. There was still more to unfold in the valley of ruin. Lot found shelter in Zoar, but though the fire had stopped, fear had not left his heart. The city, spared by mercy, still felt too close to judgment's shadow. Terrified and restless, Lot fled once again, this time into the mountains, taking his 2 daughters with him. There, in a cold, dark cave, they hid in silence. No prayers were spoken, no altar was raised, no words were offered to God. Lot had escaped destruction, but he had not been changed. His daughters, believing the world had ended, or perhaps using that belief to excuse their sin, devised a desperate and godless plan. Night after night, they made their father drunk, and in his drunkenness he lay with them both, blind, unaware, unresisting. From this act of shame came 2 sons, the elder bore Moab and the younger Ben-Ammi. These names would one day become nations, peoples who would rise as enemies of Israel. Their very existence stood as a reminder that even when judgment ends, its consequences echo through generations. In the dim silence of that cave, when the wine was gone and his senses returned, Lot opened his eyes to the stone ceiling above and whispered with trembling lips, "God of heaven, you saved my body, but what remains of me? What I lost was more than a city of stone." Lot had fled Sodom alive, but he carried Sodom within him. And though the city burned to ashes in the valley below, the spirit of its sin lived on, in the hearts of men who reject the fear of God, in cities that glorify what is wicked, in cultures that call perversion freedom and truth an offense. The cries of the innocent, the tears of the oppressed, the blood of the unjustly slain, all still rise before heaven, and heaven still listens. Heaven still answers. This story is not only about destruction, it is about warning, about mercy, and about the God who judges with righteousness, yet spares those who turn to him in repentance. If this message has stirred your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a like, subscribe, and stay with us as we continue revealing truths that many choose to ignore. And remember, do not dismiss the warning. Do not harden your heart. For the next time the heavens open, it will not be to rain fire upon the earth, but to reveal the King, coming with flames in his eyes and justice in his hands. May God bless you richly. We'll see you in the next video.